Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Abez Show with me, Abe, your host. Today, I have somebody very special with me, Mark. Hey, Mark, how are you?
Hi, Abe. Thank you very much for having me on.
It's always good to geek it out with you. I have to be honest. You're always a big comic and manga guy, so that we can always talk about other stuff other than tech. But please tell my audience who Mark is and what do you do.
Right. So my name is Mark. I did business and engineering school when I was, from like 18 to 21. I used to have corporate jobs, and then I slowly transitioned into like software development and really like, polishing my coding skills. And I ended up actually working on chatbots at a custom software development company, where I got to know about how cool that was. So with chatbots, I know like some of them were like they are super simple in terms of like the experience, but the cool thing for me was about them is that I could actually like describe something and the computer did it for me, right? So through a chatbot was the very first time when my mom could actually wire money to someone after I built something for her that could like talk to the bank's API. It was super interesting because she was like, okay, so I just type this in and it does it, and I'm like, yeah, you try it. And that was the very first time she could actually do something like that without having the complex user interface. I'm a gamer myself, of course, and that's where I found like in a specific terms like a founder market fit, right? So gaming is my jam. And it's like, how do you mix chatbots with gaming is through voice tag, which is because voice assistants are essentially chatbots. And we started building Friday the gamer assistant, and Friday is a voice assistant for gamers. You can think of it as an Alexa or like a Google assistant for games only. And it's super helpful when you're meeting a challenge, like you want to beat a boss level, and you just like want to ask Friday about like a hint, like how do I overcome this obstacle, and then Friday gives you the answer in game, so you don't have to like distract yourself anymore.
Nice. I always kept calling your AI the cheater AI, but
I know.
it's always super cool to have an somebody assist you, especially when you're stuck. Everybody played a game at some time of their lives where the big boss at the whole level is like, like you spend a couple of hours just trying to beat them, trying to figure out what their weaknesses are, right? So yeah, and I like how you described that whole AI through through your chat bot, and then you put a voice assistant on top of that, and then and then you just purposed it, which is fantastic. So tell us, like, what kind of games are you working with right now?
All right, so we have realized our audience has two types of problems. The first one being when you're very occupied with a game and you are in the zone or in the flow state of gaming, you don't like distractions. So whenever you would find, as we said, like a challenging boss level, you usually went to like Google and figure it out like from a walkthrough or from a video or from anything, like how to overcome the challenge. So the problem exists, the problem is there. A lot of people like figuring it out themselves. We just give them an extra tool to do that in the game, essentially. So it's kind of like a vitamin for the experience. Like voice provides a very good utility, and this feature is actually mainly used in like RPG games. So if you think about World of Warcraft, if you think about Minecraft, or pretty much into the hype, like survival games. For some reason, survival games were the jam like this past year, 1.5 years. And so like Valheim or Rust or yeah, Minecraft, again, not very survival, but games where you have an immense knowledge base that you don't want to or you cannot process completely, right? So in Minecraft, you understand, like you can build, like the first couple things by heart because like I know how to build a stick. In Valheim, I know how to like build a boat, etc. But when it comes to more complex recipes, that's when you actually go to Google or want to figure out something else yourself. In World of Warcraft, what is the best build for the character, what is the best sword for my character, etc. Those are all questions that you might not have, and you go to forums, you go somewhere else to figure it out. And those are all pieces of information that we actually took from online sources and brought it into Friday. So Friday can now answer those questions if you're in like an RPG game settings. Currently, we're working mostly with, or at least the most popular features of Friday are when we support Valheim, Rust, and actually Minecraft. And a different aspect, which was just, it came through a realization, to be honest, just this year when we released the first public version of Friday with the knowledge bases, was that a lot of people wanted to actually have control over the game, like voice control. So if I'm playing, for example, RTS games like StarCraft, Age of Empires, the main problem was that I like this game, and I really want to focus on the battles. I don't want to be focused on like training new miners or training new workers to mine whatever resources I need, or like keep building the supply depots or something that ups my population counter or something like that. So with Friday, what we started experimenting with is like, okay, so you as a gamer can focus on the battles, and you're like directing as a commander your armies, but just tell Friday, hey Friday, just keep the workers coming, keep building supply depots and whatnot, or like farms, so I can actually keep building the army. So it provides a different type of experience. On the one side, it's actually a different genre of like playing RTS games, because you can be like your own like commander of these armies, and it really feels like you're there in like a science fiction setting, and
Yeah.
just like sending your people like everywhere, like building. On the other side, since there's some features that are voice controlled, we made actually games accessible and more inclusive to a lot more people than could play previously. So these
Nice.
are the two things that I would like group this up.
And we were talking before the show started how you introduced even gaming to people that never gamed, right? Like, and tell me more about that. That sounds super cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an evolution of the product. I do think that whenever you start building your startup, you start building your product, you do like like the user interviews, you figure out some pain points that your users have. Like you do like design thinking, like what is the problem, what is the right problem, what is the right way to solve this problem, etc. And this the feature of accessibility, or the way we can make games more inclusive, actually came through like a natural evolution of the product. So we went to a couple events. We also obviously listened to our users. We have our own Discord channel. And the trigger there was that we had this one of the users coming to our Discord and said, guys, thank you so much for making this happen with StarCraft. I watched videos and I tried it myself, because I couldn't play StarCraft previously. So it turned out that this user of ours had a sort of cognitive disability when he was like not able to react to things, like physically unable to react to things as quickly as you need in StarCraft. If like if you watch like pro StarCraft players, they like you can't even follow what they are doing. But that made us thinking about what else can we do here, and we reached out to a couple agencies. First of all, we like looked at the market, like what is the market size, and it turns out that a lot of people think of accessibility as like a 0-1 game, right? So you either like have it and you are unable to do things, or like you don't have it and you're like let's say you brand it like healthy. But it's not, it's like a range. So if you think about visual impairment, for example, I think that's the best example I can have, is like first you start losing your sight, you need like bigger glasses, and then you go completely blind toward, unfortunately, towards the end of. But in that range we can actually have Friday assisting people through different versions of, for example, vision impairment. In some cases, Friday like helps you solving a quest. So for example, you need the item to be popped up in your face constantly because you need to be focused on that item that you need to collect, and Friday constantly shows it to you. Or whenever you ask, like Friday, keep this item on the screen, this health potion on the screen, so I understand when I'm looking at it which one I need to pick. And that was something that came very natural to us. And on the other hand, yeah, so we reached out to a couple agencies who work with disabled gamers. And what they did is like what they do is they build custom PC like hardware and controls for people to be able to play these games. You see Microsoft being emphasizing accessibility. They have new guidelines for Xbox to make sure that everybody can play it. They released the accessibility controller for the Xbox. Logitech also has accessibility. So it is a huge market that you can target or go after, because a lot of people think it's not big, but actually even like a little muscle strain can stop people from playing games, right? So if you can't hold buttons down or
Yeah.
repeatedly press buttons, like platformer games, like you constantly need to like jump over. So anyway, we started reaching out, and this company from the UK actually got back to us saying that this actually has been a pain for us, because we use 3 different pieces of software to make sure that our gamers can start playing games, or even like get to play these games that you guys are supporting. So apparently, one of the bigger games that their audience wanted to play was Red Dead Redemption 2, which is a complex game on its own, and that's not really because of the open world or the game design part, but because you can control every single element in that game. Like you get different actions if you're aiming at your horse. You get different actions if you're aiming at NPCs, non-playable characters, and whatnot. So there is so many aspects that had like keyboard layouts. Even on the console, it's very hard to like map every single key on the controller. So what we started doing is, like, we looked at all these sets of features and actually started enabling voice control. So super simple at first. The only thing we did is, like, for every single command that you have on your keyboard, we now have a Friday command. So if you want to call your horse, if you want to ride your horse, if you want to keep the right mouse button, or like the targets pressed, so you can aim or something like that. So we did all of those things. So right now, if you want to play Red Dead Redemption, the only thing you need is either the accessibility controller from Microsoft, or at least one mouse, because the rest can be done through voice. And obviously, for now, it's a slower experience. Like, you can only play it with like easy settings, and potentially not all the missions. But we actually started making a lot more games more inclusive and more accessible to a much wider array of people who get to play it thanks to Friday. And that is something that we feel very, we can that resonates with us a lot. And we feel like this is something that's going to be we know that this is going to be in our focus going forward, because it's very huge. And we found a lot of growth there. People tell each other about it, because this actually makes this game playable, and that is like a motivation that makes people tell each other about it. So
Nice.
so super excited about that.
Oh, sounds super cool, and I think maybe we should even in the end of the episode tell people to go to your site and maybe download or subscribe and stuff like that. Let's talk more about how you like where are you guys going to, right? And where is Mark going to, right? So what is what's up for Friday for the next 2 years? Like where do you guys see you're going, and where do you see Mark? You know, I'm sure you had tons of obstacles getting to where you were because we've been talking for almost 2 years now, and and I know you saw different sets of obstacles than a normal startup is because you're AI and you're very niche, and you know what I mean, and you're a gamer, and it's like there's a lot of moving parts. So tell me what's in the future for Friday and what's in the future for Mark.
I think I can sort of like skip the technological aspects of potentially, I mean, what we're looking at in terms of like technology trends. Every single piece of technology that we are using in Friday is going to evolve, like speech to text, voice assistants, natural language processing, of course, that makes sure that we understand what people are talking about. So the vision behind Friday has always been, and it remains, to create essentially a form of a friend that's sitting with you while you're playing your favorite game. And every single year we are adding more aspect to that game, to that vision, right? So we are delivering more and more of that vision every single year. So this year it was the guides. It was we started working with OpenAI and GPT-3. So GPT-3 is this cool technology that actually generates language from information that we feed to it. At least this is how we use it. So it's a very creative technology. It has many different use cases, but the way we use it is to generate these hints and tips and knowledge base elements for the game. So that's something. So if you think about 10 15 years ago, if you were playing a game, or like even 20 years ago, there was a good chance that some of your friends were sitting with you because you had like no tax, nothing. You were like chilling with your friends, and they were sitting with you. And that is the experience we want to replicate. And whenever like your friend already got through a boss level or something, he would be able to like give you like, oh, don't do that, don't jump there, because it's going to attack you there, etc., etc. So that is one aspect of Friday that through the knowledge bases we already covered or conquered, and that was this year. So we are moving forward with it. This voice control is again something that's very interesting to me, the accessibility aspect. So in the next 1 year, we'll definitely be focused on that. Right now, we don't want to rely on the APIs of game publishers or game developers, and that's simply because they can sometimes limit it. Even though we have this very good cause of, like we really want to access it because we are making your games more accessible. Like we are bringing you more users, not necessarily ourselves, but as soon as they limit it, we have like nowhere else to go. So currently we are staying on the PC. Like we have access to keyboards, we have access to the mice, and we can be as if you were controlling your game. So that's actually for the next year, to be honest. And in the upcoming years, we also want to do a lot more on the vision side of things. So now you can talk to Friday. Friday speaks to you, and Friday does what your bidding is, essentially, as like a friend, like a human being, controls the game, gives you information, not plays for you, obviously, because that's not something that we think gamers would use or would need. We want to do computer vision in the next few years, where like Friday would be able to see what you are seeing, and that's like what we want to base the helper feature on, the knowledge base feature on, or even the voice control feature on. Like, hey Friday, place this to the top left corner, like place a supply depot to the top left corner. Friday would do it for you because it sees what you're seeing.
Sure.
So that's something that we are super excited. It's kind of like like people say a VR experience is only it's going to take over the world if a VR experience can take away like at least three of your senses. So like vision, audio, and touching or smelling, etc. Some of those, if they are being taken away, you actually perceive that you are in this new reality. So it's kind of like similar to how we think of Friday with like, so we're taking the audio cues today, and we are responding and we are taking audio as like an input. But we want to go and see what the gamers are seeing, and that's kind of like what we have for Friday. On a personal level, I do think that actually myself, I think doing a startup is like doing an MBA, to be honest. And you learn a lot more than if you were in school, because you get to like talk to investors, you get to like talk to users, build a product. You get to have this real life experience. And I was very much a beginner when we started, so didn't really know much about like this whole world. Like we had this cool idea, but like where do we go from here? Like, okay, we're gamers ourselves. We could have built a game too, but we were like, no, we need to build tools that gamers use. And the more experience, the more people I've talked to, the more I've networked, the more like experience I had when building a company. uh, I felt like right now some people actually come to me for advice, which is a very interesting thing to do. And yeah, for myself, I think I need to be improving myself constantly. I'm learning like more and more about blockchain these days, as everybody does. Gaming is going to be full of NFTs, non-fungible tokens. So I think me as a CEO and co-founder of this product, I have to be on top of the trends that are coming into gaming, and the
Sure.
way we need to be aware of those. And yeah, at the end of the day, I'm super bullish on the metaverse. So I think on a personal level, I'll be more and more involved with like VR, and it's kind of like how do we interoperate in this how do we connect all these different gaming experiences.
Yeah.
And that's of interest to me on a personal level, and as well as on the product side.
Nice. Very interesting. So let's talk about something in a bit like in your experience with that.
Mhm.
Has there been any time that you regretted doing something?
Wow. Yeah, a couple of things. I have. So I think that in some cases we jumped the gun too quick. When it came to, for example, like talking to investors, or like building, or not so much building relationship with people who were super important in the life of our startup. I've always regretted maybe not writing an additional email, if it's either like for fundraising purposes. It's like, so people say like you have to write 7 emails if you want to get a response, at least a yes or a no. So I always were like thinking back and say, oh, maybe I should have sent an additional email and not let my pride stand in the way of like, no, 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 it's like, if they didn't
It's
respond, they're
done.
not going
It's done. It's like, no, it's done. It's done. You should have sent that extra email.
to.
I know,
Yeah,
especially.
that's That's it. I always so that's one thing. I think there are some, in many cases we should have been more transparent with our company, and even as team members with each other. Like I thought this in like at a meeting, I thought like not going to this direction, but I never said a word, and like it, the others were like super excited about it, but that's why I was like, okay, so let's just leave it like that. And like even though I had this feeling of like maybe I should share this with them, it's not. It's like communication and transparency is always key when building a startup, is especially when it's still like a small team and you get to share things with each other. And the same applies to like earlier investors, like whenever making a move, it's always good to have, it's always good to have like a third party, like a filter to it, because like, for example, in my conversations with you, like you have a much more experience than I have in building companies, like how to make it successful. You have all this experience with like like talking to investors, like building products, hiring people, like for key positions, etc. So like I have all these regrets of like like not involving more people, at least like on an advisory level, right? Yeah, I mean, I think in some cases when we rushed into something, that was something that's a big regret. And yeah, sometimes it helps, but it always is good to like take a step back and think about like the longer term effects of your decisions if you can.
As you said, it is learning, right? So I never, honestly, I never really regretted anything, because I know sometimes you're like, I should have done this, or I messed up here, but it's a learning curve, right, for you. And some of them are much bigger than the others. You lose a piece of business, you lose a co-founder, you lose money, you run a campaign, and like you say oops, you know what I mean, like nothing happened. And that's I think a part of the game, right? So okay, I'm going to ask a question that I ask all of my guests. It's something I think you're going to enjoy, because I know you're into the whole. So I ask,
Okay.
if you would have a superpower, what would that be? Or if you want to mimic a superhero, who would that be?
That is a very good question. So I think that's also been an evolution for me. Like I used to be a huge Wolverine fan, and one of them was like this X-Man, and that's when I read first about Wolverine, and I liked him as like directness. I liked the fact that like he could like he had this like leadership mentality, like he led the X-Men after obviously the professor like left, or like something happened to them. So that was like but like as a childhood hero for me. I think as I have matured and then become more like with of this scientific mindset, I started preferring heroes that are more like solving problems through their wits, or through their scientific skills, etc. So obviously I became a fan of like Batman from DC and Iron Man from the Marvel universe, and that's simply because they managed to solve this. I mean, even if you put them down in a desert, right, desert, like in the middle of the desert, they would come up with something that like solves this problem. And I think those are very much relatable heroes in the current days, because they are like builders, they created something. And I think a lot of startups actually think of them as like the go-to heroes. But again, like lately I've started like rediscovering like Superman, Captain America, purely for leadership skills, because those are actually the skills that I currently need to sort of like to build this startup. And that's why I think like if you are aware of superheroes like you and me, you understand sort of like there are some elements of their personality that you can really resonate with and relate to.
Yeah.
And it's always that's always been like that for me. So I don't know if you can see here, like I have like an Iron Man poster right there, like actually two Iron Man posters, and I won't have for like have one for Guardians of the Galaxy. So I would definitely go with Iron Man. I really like
Nice.
his arc.
Yeah, I would say you're more Batman because of what you're trying to build. More of a detective, you know what I mean? Like, the detective. But
Right.
Iron Man definitely is a great problem solver, and is somebody that literally can build anything anywhere. And let's not compare Batman's, because mine is like sitting right next to me. But
I know. I feel bad now that I showed it, to be honest.
yeah, it's okay. It's okay. No, I'm not going to show my audience. But okay, in closing, would you like to tell our audience anything?
Absolutely. So if you're a gamer, if you're not a gamer, definitely come to hellofriday.com. It's a Friday with an AI at the end.com. and give a go to Fridai. It's free to download. It's on the Microsoft Store, so unfortunately, Mac users won't be able to use it, but PC users more than welcome to. Let us know your thoughts. We have a beta group test. We have a beta tester group running constantly. You can always apply for that, and we also have some perks for you. Like we buy you games, and the only thing you need to do is try Fridai with those games and help us with the development. And yeah, I'm hoping that I was inspiring enough to have someone start a career in games or gaming or look into the metaverse that we are going to be. We live in it more and more every day. Like we live like it. The digital world becomes almost as real as the physical world for all of us. And now we need the tools in like the digital world to be able to handle everything that's coming our way. So potentially, if I've inspired anyone to like look into these topics and learn more about this, that was a fantastic experience. And yeah, thanks so much, Abe.
No problem. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And in saying that, we do have a hashtag our for the show. This hashtag is Real Talk No Nonsense. Please check us out. Until next time, thank you, and thank you, Mark. Bye bye.
Thank you, Abe. Bye bye.